Welcome to the Indigenous Language Institute Webinar Symposium Series. I'm Nadeau, ILI board member and your moderator. Today's presentation featuring Patricia Ningewance will last approximately 1 hour. After the presentation, we will take a 10-minute break before starting the Q&A session. During the break, keep this window open. Do not leave the webinar. You cannot be readmitted. To submit a question, use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session after the break. And now, may I present Patricia Ningewance.
Bonjour. Wave bishiki kwende jnikas makwando dem obishigokang jnikade ganjian. My name is Patricia Ningewance. My clan is Bear, and I'm from Laxall, Ontario in Canada. I've been a language teacher for a long time, and I'm 72 years old now, and I've been teaching for a very long time, since I was in my 20s. At this point, I should probably also mention that I am a board member of the Indigenous Language Institute. I'm vice president right now, and I have enjoyed being a board member of this wonderful organization that does such beautiful work in upholding our languages. So for myself, I speak my language, Ojibwe. I've started when I was a child because my family still spoke it at that time. What I will be talking about in my presentation is my 50-year plan for the Ojibwe language. I'm very excited to be talking about this. I've been speaking about this subject for the last 3 months as a keynote speaker in Canada and also in Minnesota. It's something that's been very, very inspiring to me since I wrote it, because it's very optimistic. I hear too much of us losing our languages, and I know that's happening. It certainly is happening here among my own people, but I know it's happening across the country here and across the US. So to talk about what could happen, what will happen in 50 years if we start working this year. That's very optimistic, that's very heartening, and that's what I will be talking about. But for now, I would like to start off with talking about where I come from, what led me to being here. I, like a lot of children my age at that time, I was sent to residential school when I was 5 years old. I know in the States, you have these boarding schools that existed at that time. But I was sent to one at 5, and it was a horrible year. I won't go into the details, but we were punished for speaking our language in those times. Later on, I went to another one where we were allowed to speak our language. But in Sulakaut, near Laxall, where I come from, everybody spoke the language at that time, everybody. And it was a very good situation. But during that year, that's the only year that I went to residential school. And after that, I went home. Back to my family. I was very lucky to be able to do that. And at home, I had my grandmother, my Gokum, and she was the one that continues to be a source for me. She encouraged me to be a language teacher, to be proud of my language. And forever. I will be grateful to her. She spoke 2 languages. She spoke Ojibwe and also English, which was unusual at that time. What I remember of her one time when I was about 8 years old, I think, I asked her, Kokum, you speak English very fluently, and our language, of course. Why do you speak only Ojibwe at home with us and not English? And she said to me, she said, we're not English people. So that's why I speak in our language at home. We are not English people. That made such an impression on me forever. And I still remember her words. So I moved to Sault Ste. Marie later on as a teenager to go to school there. And I went to another residential school there, but things were more relaxed there. That's where I studied European languages. And that was a good experience for me as a future language teacher, because I got to see how other language teachers teach the language, teaching the grammar and teaching vocabulary and how to speak. So that was a good experience. And I tell that to language teachers everywhere I see them, to speak, to learn other languages, whether it's Spanish or Italian or French. It's a very valuable experience because you're learning other teachers' methodologies, but you're also understanding how it feels to be a student. It's how nerve-wracking it can be to try to pronounce foreign words, and the encouragement you can get from your teacher, how that feels, and just the process of learning another language. So I tell language teachers, please learn other languages. You'll learn as a teacher to doing that. So later on, after high school, I went to work in Sulakaut, where I come from, near where I come from. And I worked as a translator and also as producer of language materials. As I said, at that time, everybody spoke the language, and this organization that hired me, we got government funding to set up a program where we could produce language programs in radio and also in TV production, in TV. So that was my job, to produce Ojibwe language TV programming, and to do versioning. Versioning is where you translate a language, English script, and then voice it in a studio. And so you get the language there for the elders to listen to. At that time, elders did not speak English, so it was very, very valuable for them to learn about the world at their age. That's how I translated in those days. You don't just translate, you also explain the outer world, outside world to the elders. The radio programs were good. There were radio stations throughout the north where I lived, and in each radio station, they would broadcast in Ojibwe or different dialects all day long. So that was the language that was heard all day long, and that was so good. That program doesn't run anymore, but I think these radio stations, a lot of them are still running, and a lot of places, I think English is getting to be used more and more. But that was very, very good to have these radio programs, these radio stations at that time. Versioning, of course, is a very cheaper way to provide native language programming instead of live production. I want to mention another activity I did at that time. 1983 it was. I organized an orthography conference for Ojibways. At that time, we were using a lot of phonetic spelling in communities. The universities were the only ones that were using standardized spelling. So I brought speakers from across our area, and including Minnesota and Wisconsin. And we talked about our spelling for 3 days. And on the third day, we were to choose one orthography, but we just ended up recognizing that the university's spelling system is the one that is most widely used. And so that's what would be used. That's the spelling that I use and promote. So that was a very good activity to do, because for language planning, I think in a nation's language planning, one common orthography is important so that the speakers, the learners, can share materials that way, because they're using one common writing system, and there's no guesswork as to how words are pronounced. Dictionaries can be made in them, and lesson books, textbooks, and so on. So that was an important activity to have done. I'll mention my teaching. I teach, I'm assistant professor at the University of Manitoba, and I teach 3 levels of Ojibwe there. And we begin with the beginner's level, and then intermediate, and then to the advanced level. I found that as a language teacher, we start off teaching a lot of vocabulary. I certainly did as a language teacher. You start off teaching names of things, and it was very later on that I got into the grammar of the language, even though I knew the grammar. Now I've gone back to the beginning, and that's to teach conversation. I choose to teach conversation now because my courses are now immersion style. And that's the only way I feel now that we can learn to speak our languages, that we could teach our students to speak the languages if we teach immersion style, and that's to teach conversations. So that's what I've been doing the last 2 years, concentrating on teaching immersion style. We did one last spring, which was very good. It was a 1-month Ojibwe immersion course, and our students heard no English for 1 month. They all lived there together. I taught grammar without using English for the first 2 weeks. Very intensive, very hard work for everybody, myself, and also every student that was in there. But it was very good. And the last 2 weeks, it was more relaxed for them because they got to use whatever language that they learned in the first 2 weeks, and were able to converse with each other, and in a fun setting, dancing and singing and playing games. It was a very good program because a lot of those students can now still speak to each other, and at some level, I'm very proud of them. We did another one for the university this past, just finished the other week. That one was just 2 weeks. Again, it was just no English for 2 weeks. And I did a lot of very intensive teaching. My grandson, who is now a fluent speaker, assisted me in teaching this course. And that was good having the two of us teach, because there was one activity that I came across that really worked. He and I would talk to each other, and I would say a word with all the inflection, all the intonation in it, and then the student that I chose would imitate me. I'd say it this way, because otherwise they would say it in a monotone or using their own intonation, which was not appropriate. So we did that, and I was really proud of their dialogues after they finished that exercise, because they were able to imitate how we spoke, imitate Ojibwe pronunciation and intonation, the way we talk, the way we say idiomatic expressions, which are very important to teach. So that was a very good program. Very happy that we're able to do that. I would like to. I'll be discussing some more of those activities that we used to do these immersion courses. But I think right now I will just start talking about the 50-year plan. How this came about was that I was asked by my university to write a 5-year program, and so I did. And then I was dissatisfied with it, because 5 years, that's just very little. So I embarked on this 50-year plan. What do I want the language to be in 2073? That's 50 years from now. When I think about the last 50 years, that went by so fast. So I think the next 50 years can come by fast for our young people. So what I envisioned for my language, where we still have speakers, is that I would like there to be sanctuaries, Ojibwe language sanctuaries, artificial communities, if you will, where the language is spoken by everybody that lives in each community, in each of those sanctuaries. Each sanctuary would be a community. And in that community, there would be stores, schools, everything done in the language. The stores would be operated by people that speak the language, restaurants, hotels, banks, maybe too, and a university, a hospital, all done in the language. The university is the one that I'm most excited about, because that's where the professors would be teaching in the language to students that speak only the language. And all the textbooks would have been translated by translators, all the different technical books. They would all be in the language, and all teaching done in Ojibwe. Everything written in the language, how that came to me was when I was 14. I met an Ojibwe man who spoke perfect English, very spoke both languages very, very well. And I listened to him talk about the world in Ojibwe. and he used such wonderful vocabulary. Yeah, I think he was in his late 30s. And I thought this must be what university would be like if I were to be in a Ojibwe language university. I would be getting instruction in my language. I thought this is the ultimate. This is the ultimate. And I wished for that, but that never happened. That never came to be. I was very disappointed in university when I did go, because everything was done in a foreign language, foreign to me. And so I would love to see an Ojibwe language university 50 years from now, taught by fluent professors. So that would be what the language sanctuary would be like. So how do we reach that? How do we get there? One thing we have to do is look at the decades, each decade before 2073. What will have to happen in the year 2023, where we are right now, and for the next 10 years? We have to create fluent speakers. We have to, while we can, while we have fluent speakers, those of us who are in communities where there's still fluent speakers, that's what we need to do. And if you don't have fluent speakers in your community, maybe you could import people who speak the language to teach that. And so we need to have long-term language programs to teach our languages now, so we could have these fluent speakers 50 years from now who will be teaching their children, and the language is taught in the home that way, the way we learned language. Apprenticeship is another way, besides long-term immersion programs. I think I have about 3 or 4 students here in Manitoba that I've taken on as apprentices. I'm very proud of them because they worked so hard to be where they are, to know as much Ojibwe as they do now. And so I am continuing with their instruction, and I'm hoping by next summer they will be talking in the language with me. And so I'm on my way to creating these 3 fluent speakers, having succeeded with my grandson. So so that's one thing. And the other thing there are 3 things we need to do while we have fluent speakers these days. The other one is to modernize our languages. That's really important. Right now, we don't have a lot of terminology that we need to have translated. Just everyday things that we have in our homes. We don't have words for computer gadgets that we have, anything in the kitchen, anything that we use every day. So when we have immersion programs, we don't have to use loan words to borrow from English all the time, because that will water down our conversations, and next thing you know, we're talking in English. So we need to translate a lot of the terms that we have, that we use every day in English, so that we don't have to switch back and forth to English from Ojibwe. To do that, we would have to have workshops of elders to work on terminology lists. I've done those in the past 2 months, I should say, where we had elders get together and we talked about computer terminology, for instance, and other areas. So that's what we need to do while we still have fluent speakers. It's very crucial at this time to do that. So that's two things, fluency and modernizing the language. The third thing that we need to do while we still have fluent speakers at this time is to make films. We need to make films, not just documentaries, but we need to have dramas written in the language by fluent speakers. These cannot be translated from English, because if you're translating scripts from English, then you're just perpetuating English thought, English sensibilities, and that is not what we need. We need our own scripts to be written originally in our language, so that these expressions and these plots would reflect our culture, the way we act, the way we laugh, our tragedies, how we treat each other. All these would be in the language in these films. We really, really need to do that, and I'm hoping for myself that I will start doing that next year. While we still have fluent speakers who could be the actors, and we could also teach the students who are apprentices right now. Once they start becoming fluent speakers, they will be acting in these movies. So the directors, anybody who's a director or film script writer, actor, any part of that industry will have to be fluent so that they can all work together. You need to have the production people speaking in the language. This past winter, we were doing Ojibwe language radio scripts. We worked with a group of people, but all the any editing that had to be done was done by English only people, because we didn't have people that speak the language to do that kind of work. So it showed me how badly we need everybody to work in a language, so they can understand what the script is about, how where to edit and all that. So that's another thing. That's the third thing that we need to do to create these dramas in film, and also on radio for podcasts, maybe anything that could be a resource for language learners, anything to have for people. And when you have things like that, I think it shows that children who are only English, that their language has every right to be on a screen or on a stage. That's the other thing too, not just films, but also plays written in the language, so that you have Ojibwe or any other language on the stage. And so that would be really good for the children to see, for them to see that their language is every bit as important as English language productions. Of course, that goes into also publishing. Myself, I've been publishing language books, and I went through a process there too, where when I started off, I was my books had no shiny covers. Everything was black and white, and that's because I felt that I felt that I couldn't afford it. That publishing was so expensive, and it belonged to the outer world, the white world. And my language didn't fit in that world. I had to maybe publish twice before I started getting into shiny covers, that I found that I could afford these colors on the front cover and back cover, and that I could have shiny covers. And I just finished a book now, and it's going to have full color inside too. I can afford to do that. And I want my books to look very good, because they're as important as English language books. So we go through this process where we're evolving, I guess. We're from looking at our own languages as second class. We are now embracing them. We're proud of them. We're showing them off to the world, and we need to keep on doing that. So those are the three things that I really want to see done. Creating speakers, fluent speakers, who will live in these sanctuaries, these towns, and modernizing our languages today, while we still have fluent speakers who can translate all this terminology, all this vocabulary. And the third one is production of language materials for film, for audio, and in publishing. Publishing would also cover literature. I would like to see novels, full novels written in our languages by fluent speakers, people who can write in the language and could use complicated words, really long, descriptive words. A few years ago, I co-wrote a thesaurus, Ojibwe thesaurus. And in that thesaurus, if a fluent person is looking for a word, they can't think of that word. They just look in the thesaurus, and then there's a whole bunch of words that would, let's say, have to do with cooking. You know, all the words are there, as many words as possible. So that is another good resource. And I would like to see other languages on our continent to have thesauruses like that, because there you have the language. And these are not the same as dictionaries. Bilingual dictionaries have English translated. Thesaurus is just the language. It's only for fluent speakers when they're searching for a word, or if they're writing, and they need to look for a word. I had some advanced Ojibwe students use this thesaurus to write beautiful science fiction stories. One of them wrote a totally beautiful story using words from the thesaurus, because these were very descriptive words. And so I would like to see that happen across our territory, our country, to have fluent speakers writing in the language, using their own thesauruses to write university level language, to write full novels that are artistic, using their language to its full depth. So those are the three things that I think are really important for us to do during this time. I want to mention at this time something that is blocking us from doing a lot of this kind of work. And that's what I actually call it. I call it the block. And it's what I guess it's what happened to us when we went to residential school, when we were punished for for speaking our languages, and it prevented us from passing on the languages in our homes, and or learning it at university, learning it from our own family members in our families. It's a block, and this fall we're going to have a conference to deal with that subject, to have fluent speakers and also language learners come together and discuss that problem, because it's very much a problem for us. It's preventing us from teaching our languages, and it's and learning our languages. So we need to deal with that before we can go on. And again, I'm very hopeful and optimistic that that we will do something with that. And right now, I can't anticipate what solutions our people will come up with when we do this conference. They may be very simple, maybe to use humor in the classes, to use humor in the home when we're teaching our families. Maybe we need to use different methods. Which brings me to another topic of another book that I'm mentioning this book because I hear all the time, I can't teach the language because I don't know the grammar. I can't teach the language because I cannot spell. So that prevents a lot of people from not passing on their language because they can't spell or know the grammar. We don't need to spell. We don't need to know our grammar to teach it. My grandmother didn't know grammar. She didn't spell the language, but she passed on the language beautifully to me and my parents. So I wrote a book that's of language lessons where a person, an aunt or uncle, mother, father, could pass on the language in their home. And it's just a book of language lessons. What you do, you could do it in the bush, out on the prairie somewhere, anywhere. Very low tech. Tells you how to teach the language, how to have conversations. And I think we need to do that. We really need to do that now before we lose more fluent speakers. Every day we're losing fluent speakers. And that's very, very sad, because there goes another speaker. There goes another potential teacher, another potential passer on of the language every time we lose a person of my age or younger, sometimes even younger. So that is the 50-year plan as I see it. I have written it out, the activities that would have to happen in the first 10 years, where we would translate for the books that will be used, translating, teaching, and what the universities could teach, community colleges could teach during the first 10 years. And then the second decade, third decade, fourth decade, just doing more of what needs to be done, making films. That is one of the most important ones I see, making these films, because we need to have them done by fluent speakers. All this would be so it's important to have all this done in the first 10 years, because we're at the 11th hour of keeping our languages. This has been just for Ojibwe, because that's what I am, that's what I've spoken, that's what I've written, worked in for the last 50 years. But I'm thinking, what do communities do where their language is have a small number of speakers? That's a whole different topic. The special needs there for those communities. I would welcome questions, comments about that from people who might be listening here, because that's very, so many of our communities are in that situation because of what has happened to us in the past. Residential schools and boarding schools, how our languages became diminished. So we still need to create those materials, finding the speakers that still exist for those communities. It needs to happen now. I might want to mention before my hour ends here, as a result of teaching language for so long, I have been realizing, finding that the language learner needs to follow a path. There's a path that's there for them to follow. I didn't know that when I first started teaching, and the materials that were present at that time for language teachers, they didn't have that. It was all based on how you teach French, or, you know. But now I realize that there is a path that the language learner must follow. And of course, it's all to do with verbs, you know, conversations and verbs. What kind of benchmarks does the student have to accomplish in his or her language learning? There are benchmarks there, how to do a certain number of things by this time in your language learning, and then go on to another benchmark, important benchmark, maybe a year later or 2 years later. So I've been sharing that path by doing my classes using that path. So I wanted to mention that here now. And I'm sure other languages, other native languages, Dakota, Mohawk, any of the other languages that are spoken, I'm sure they have a path too that their language teachers recognize and follow. I think I will end this presentation here, Maura.
Thank you, Pat. That was a very inspiring presentation, and I'm sure people will have a lot of questions. I know I have a few. So right now we're going to take a short break, about 10 minutes, before we start the question and answer session. During the break, keep this window open. Do not leave the webinar. If you do, you won't be able to be readmitted. And to submit a question, use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And when we come back in 10 minutes, we will start the Q&A session and answer all your questions. Thank you. Hi, we're coming back from our break. So if you have any questions, submit them through the Q&A. And as soon as Patricia comes back, we will ask her the questions. The first question is from Stephen Eckert. He says, thank you for sharing your sweeping vision. To accomplish, will it take the involvement and commitment of many people and cost a lot of money? What are your thoughts about mobilizing the Ojibwe communities and other organizations to support this?
I don't know where he's writing from. In Canada, we have a language commission that is handing out language money for projects. So in Canada, we have that. I don't know what you have in the US. So I can't answer if he's in Minnesota or Wisconsin. But in Canada, we could have communities write grants and start doing anything that I mentioned in the that would have to be done in the first 10 years, which is terminology development or creating new speakers. That's very important. And also engaging in filmmaking.
Thank you. This is from Damian Webster. And he asks, what do you think about implicit grammar? For instance, you said your grandma didn't know grammar, but she still passed on the language. When I listen to elders do lessons, they don't worry about the grammatic aspects, but they know exactly where they go and how to use them, even if they can't explain why it's like that.
That's certainly what happens when you have fluent speakers who will not, who do not teach grammar. The student will ask, how do you say this? And the elder will answer, this is how we would say it. And it's up to the student to figure out the grammar behind it, I guess, and not for the teacher, because the teacher didn't learn grammar in Ojibwe school.
Here's a question from Carmen Atkins. Did you monetize the 50-year plan? For example, to develop a fluent teacher requires money.
Say that again, please.
Did you monetize the 50-year plan? For example, to develop a fluent teacher requires money.
Again, I wish I knew where that person was coming from. Otherwise, I can't really answer that, except to reiterate that in Canada we have a different situation than from the States.
I think what she's asking, if you actually developed the 50-year plan yet to have started gaining funds to put it in action. But I think right now this is just what you're proposing, Pat, right?
Yes.
Yes. Gerald Hill has a question. How are community leaders, i.e. governments, involved in this process?
Not at all. Not at all. Only in Canada, like I mentioned, we have a commission that's there to assist communities in setting up programs, doing anything to save the language. So that's what we have here in Canada.
Gerald sort of asked another question, which is, should governments be involved in this process?
Oh, definitely, definitely. The commission that we have here, we also, before it was set up, there was a program to help with preservation of language, but they never consulted with Native people to state what they would like to see in these, but that's not what we have. That's not what we have. I wish there were regional programs where, let's say, the Ojibwe Nation could get together and discuss what its needs are, because we, like any nation, we have communities that were exposed to English very early on, who lived next to towns where they've lost their speakers. And then we have the isolated communities in the north, where the language is still very, very strong, where all the children are still speaking it. So I would like to have seen programs like that, where the nation, let's say Mohawk, can state what its needs are, and be assisted to work out a language plan for themselves, and how they can do it as a group for all its needs. That's what should happen. That's what really should happen, because we're across the continent. We have all these different situations, all these different languages. Maybe related language groups could work together. That would work.
I have a question for you, Pat. So you mentioned the need to contemporize language by expanding vocabulary to include terminology for things that haven't existed previously, like computer technology and other things, maybe medical technology and what have you. So as you go into a meeting with elders to address this, how do they approach it? Is it approached through a methodology of creating new words in the same way that words were created before?
I've been helping with developing medical terminology and other subjects. But I usually start by creating a template of the terms that we need to translate. And with a medical one, I think I devised a template of 1,800 words. That's a lot of words to translate. For instance, we had symptoms, diseases, ways of healing. So what we did was we worked in a group. We gathered people from different dialects of that language. So we'd have a variety of dialects in that group. And then we would translate each word to the best that we could. And then we would choose, or at least try to choose, one word that was mutually understandable to everybody. Because if one person's word wasn't understood by someone who came from a community quite far away, we wouldn't choose that word. We would try to pick a word that everybody could understand, and a word that was as short as possible, concise, so that if a person heard that word, they would know exactly what that word meant. Sometimes it was really hard because some words are just totally hard to translate. So you end up with almost a paragraph, or at least a sentence to describe something. But if we could have one word that describes that object, very good. The shorter, the better. Other languages in the world have borrowed from the English, for instance. just made it sound more French or Italian. But there's a lot of loan words out, in other languages.
I know when Cherokee Nation was trying to do this, that they were, picking words. I don't remember what they were because I'm not a Cherokee speaker, but that were descriptive in the Cherokee language of, let's say, a computer, for instance. Like, let's say they chose the words for looking on the world or something like that. Is that something that you?
Yeah, sometimes we have a word that's for instance, the word for computer, your phone, for instance, your phone is now your little computer, because if you want information, you just open your phone and click, and there you have information from the world there. So what one community came up with for computer was a word that translated as magic box.
Okay.
And I love that. Instead of trying to state what the computer can do, it's just a magic box.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. And that seems like that would be kind of fun, actually, although very challenging. So we have not a question from Glenn Jim, but I guess a comment. He says, not a question, but a comment of support. In British Columbia, the First Peoples Cultural Council is a major funder and resource development agency. Unfortunately, it only serves BC-based First Nations and organizations. We even fund long-term strategic language revitalization planning. And he gives us our website, which is fpcc.ca. Very useful resources available for all language revitalists. Have you heard of that?
Yes, I have. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. In BC, they have quite a different situation there, where they have so many languages distinct from each other, and just in smaller communities than we have out here. Here we have Ojibwe that is spoken in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and in the States, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. That's a large area.
Yeah. Are there any more questions? I don't see any on the Q&A board. If you have one, type it in quickly. Okay. Well, I guess thank you, Pat, for your in-depth answers to these questions. They were very informative. And thank you for your wonderful presentation about the 50-year plan. And if anybody has any other questions about that plan at a later date, they can contact ILI and they will be forwarded to Pat, and I'm sure, will be glad to answer. We want to thank you for attending our presentation this morning. We will be having more, so keep your eyes open for coming emails from ILI about the next symposium, which I think is just in a couple of weeks. And we thank you for participating, and hope that this 50-year plan reaches more people so that we can keep this language movement moving. So on behalf of ILI, I thank you very much for attending, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.